All right.
Yeah. Boy.
We've got 12 o'clock. We're here for the Transportation Committee. We have a full quorum of the committee. And we have one item for discussion. I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Sherwin to introduce the topic. I did pull up our current schedule, but
Yeah, this was something Jason and I were talking about because our current contract with Durham Bus Services runs through the 25-26 school year. So the year after this year is the last year of that 5-year contract. And the reason we really were kind of forming this committee to have a discussion is, well, how do we want to proceed with transportation services going forward? Because transportation services is a little different than, just going out and say bidding widgets and getting the best price and, making some decisions. So we thought, well, why don't we have a discussion with the committee now to kind of see how we want to approach this? And there's probably 3 options available. One of which would be to enter into some type of negotiations with them and extending the contract in terms of rates for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe even up to 5 years. Another option would be to look at bidding out our transportation services and see how the numbers fall and who would be interested in providing services, including our current provider. And a third option, I guess, would be as well, would we ever want to consider having our own transportation system and not contracting it? I'm not advocating certainly that we do either one of those 3. It's just those are probably the 3 main options available. And I think one of the important reasons for this committee to meet now to at least begin to talk about that is that if there was an interest of either looking at doing our own internal transportation or for bidding out transportation services, that's a process we need to start like now, if that makes sense. Because the last thing we want to be in is in a position, I think, for any district is the final year of a transportation contract and to at that point begin this discussion. In other words, next year at this time is not a good time to start this discussion because it puts the district in a disadvantage, obviously, for a whole bunch of reasons. So I think that's probably the reason we wanted to talk with the committee today. It's really just to kind of get a sense. Historically here at Elkhorn, and Kevin, you probably got some more history than certainly I would have, but this district has been originally with Jones Bus Services for a long time. And Eric Jones and Scott Jones bought the business from their father, I think back in early 2000. And ran that business for a number of years and then sold it to Durham at that point in time. And we've been with Durham ever since. At one juncture in 2015-16, as we were trying to negotiate at that time rate adjustments and a new contract with Durham, we couldn't come to an agreement. They wanted what I think was a 7 or 8% increase. And the board said, you know what, let's finish up our contract and let's bid that out. So we went through that process and we started about a year ahead of time. Ultimately through that process, I think we had 4 bidders that originally submitted proposals. When we were sitting here in this room and opening up bids, one of the bidders pulled from the process during the bid opening. And then we had the current provider, which was Durham, and then 2 other companies out of the Milwaukee area, and Durham came in as low bid. And the other 2 were much more expensive, if I remember. So that was kind of our world at that point. So that was a process that probably worked out okay for the district because they ended up coming in at a lower rate than they would have, at least where we at through a negotiation process. The risk with that, of course, is that if they didn't come in and they weren't low, we probably would have been paying more money as a district than if we would have just negotiated with them. That's our risk as a school district. The market is such that there's not a lot of transportation providers out there. The mom and pop operations don't really exist anymore. So most of the competition would probably be our current Dousman, which provides services for Delavan, Lake Geneva, and some other districts. You got Nelson Bus Company out of Whitewater. I don't know if they would be interested. And then you have several in the Milwaukee market. That's probably our market for transportation. So those are probably our options to consider. And again, as Jason and I were talking, say, well, let's talk about this now because the clock's ticking. Yes, we have one more year after this year, but we don't want to wait too much further depending on what process we decide as a district and how to proceed.
Do you remember what company pulled out during the bidding process?
Yeah, it was Jones,
Oh.
Eric Jones. So Eric provided a proposal. I think he was nervous that the local Durham was not going to get the contract and he didn't want to lose the terminal. That's my guess. And then as we went through the bid opening, I think Jason, you may remember this. I think Eric's company was the last company to open the bids, and when he was seeing the numbers coming in, he decided to pull out.
And yeah, and we didn't get a bid submitted from Dousman. Which was a little surprising because they are the major provider of this section. But I think they had a concern with the capacity and or bus terminal location. One of the challenges with a district our size is we are a larger district. So I think we run 23 regular bus routes now. With
It was 23.
Yeah. So, you know, plus the additional routes. So it's not a small endeavor where some of the smaller shops could say, oh yeah, we could bid like Williams Bay runs 2 bus routes, you know, 2 times. Or so those are easy to manage logistically. So it's a little bit bigger challenge, that aspect. And I know we've never done a serious deep dive, at least in my time, and I don't believe because historically it's always been with the private contractor. But I do think that it may be worthwhile to at least get a sense for what would that entail or look like in running our own buses and that aspect, because that may end up being, with the way the market is, that alternative bid solution if bids don't come back in a reasonable percentage or that aspect. You know, what does that look like? What does it entail? And there's a lot of different models in doing that. As far as getting a pricing out, obviously, first and foremost is the buses. When I was in Wheatland, we ran our own buses. Over half the districts I've been in, we ran our own buses, but they're much smaller. But I am just familiar with that type process, like working with Nelson's, because they sell buses. There's a number of companies that do. They had also pointed out that there's lease models where you can lease buses, you know, 3-year-old buses for 3 years, or you can lease new buses for 1 year and they never, you know, you don't have the maintenance or the warranty. So there's a lot of different models out there on how you can do the acquisition of the fleet that can fix in your annual costs on that fleet, but then you've got all your personnel costs in that location. I think one of the things that may be up in the air as well, and that would be worth a conversation with Eric Jones, is what are they wanting to do with that terminal? They did sell all the property for Tronomy minus the bus depot in that section. But my understanding from working with the city is that there was also an interest in acquiring that section of land as well, which has not been sold as of yet, but I don't know.
So is Durham not running out of there any?
They are running out.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's another piece too, without approaching Durham. We don't know what their intent is. A nationwide company. They pulled out of different places they've stayed in. I think I would recommend that we approach them and see what their contract extension is. That's the simplest. We can get a good price. It's easy for me to get a price comparison of what Dousman's charging in the region to get a feel for what a likely bid renewal would be. I think our rates are pretty competitive with Durham right now when we've looked at that in the past. And that would be a good starting point to see what their proposal is for the future.
Any new contractor, if you went the contractor route, would almost demand at least a 5-year contract. I just don't see anyone coming in here, creating a terminal and doing anything like that less than 5 years. That's pretty standard. I think as Jason's describing it, I think there is some advantage and flexibility it provides the district if we're relatively satisfied with our current provider and the rates are reasonable to maybe look at an extension, even if it's 2 to 3 years or maybe up to 5 years. I think it gives the district that much more latitude to start planning if in fact we want to go a different direction, and maybe the market will change a lot between now and a few years down the road, who knows? But again, the reason we're bringing it up today is if the board or our thought process was, no, we're not happy, we want to bid this out and go a different route. Well, that then pivots our entire direction of where we want to go and how we want to approach this. So I think we're just looking for more feedback and thoughts than anything else.
Well, I came from Iowa. In Iowa, I don't know anyone that didn't own their own buses. And in our district, the bus driver kept the bus at home because they worked around the drivers. Their route was where their home was. And I'm just thinking of that wouldn't be something we'd want to do.
Well, I was just thinking the logistics of having our own fleet, where would we go with it?
Well, we would have to do the same thing and secure, like lease. Jones is the only bus depot that's right here nearby. So the two options the district would have would be build your own location or lease, the location from somebody else. So obviously, as of right now, where he hasn't sold that property, he would want that to be leased. So that would certainly be an option. If going to make it your own district, you would now employees would have, obviously, if they're Durham employees, they might have their 401k in that piece. Many of them may say, well, no, Durham's a large enough company, I'll go work at these other spots, but typically you would want to retain them or ask people to come over. From a personnel model, you would need to probably duplicate from a personnel standpoint what they have in place, the manager, the support staff and all that. But I think that's a little bit larger study. What would it take to do that? What would be the leasing cost? And there's no guarantee that that location would be open and or available from the lease standpoint. What you mentioned is true, and in the districts that I had, like up north in particular, where they were more spread out, the drivers, some of them, if they had space at home and so forth, they would take them home and then they would leave from their location. In New Glarus, I think it was a mix, some of them, but there were a lot of drivers that I don't have anywhere to park, the bus, so they would leave it there at the school and then go and pick those up. So I've seen it both ways, where that can work either way. But what I would say, something that I've noticed having been from school control to the company control, the controls, the formality, the training process, and what Durham has in place is far and away better than anything we ever provided as a school district standpoint. Because that is their job, their business, their quality control pieces that they had in place is phenomenal. But again, I never worked at a district that was large enough to have those full-time getting. I was in charge of transportation as the principal or superintendent. So I can tell you that Durham definitely does a better job than I did in those aspects. But I think my concern would be not having that as at least a backup plan or an option to consider if bids come in way out. We just don't have a way to control some of that inflationary pieces. If the contract offer that comes back from Durham is an 8 or 9% increase. And like Bill said, if we go out to bid, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to come in.
Do you have a
Less.
sense of price comparison with Dousman? I mean, I know you have contacts at other
Yeah,
districts.
I would have to go and pull that up or ask for their updated rates, and I don't have that currently. But-
It wouldn't be hard to get,
Yeah,
either. I mean, we could just contact Delvin and Lake Geneva and
right.
some other districts and get after that. Now, sometimes the contracts are, it's a little like Apple. and
They
oranges.
vary from district to district for the same company.
Yes,
Yeah.
you know how they're structured, sometimes they include the fuel, sometimes they don't, so it's not always a clear analysis, but it's information that would be helpful, probably.
I'd like to hear what Durham has to say. I mean, I think you should contact them. Discussion, I don't think we, at this point, commit to a 5-year contract. But, I mean.
Maybe a couple year extension.
I wouldn't be shocked if they put a proposal together. You know, if we said, well, maybe a 2 or 3 year, and they put that together, but they probably would also put a 5-year, and my guess is the rates would be less under a 5-year. Simply because that just locks them in for 5
Right.
years, but that would become a board decision and approach that, so.
I think that's a good starting point to ask them for
Yeah.
proposal and see what they come back with.
And at the same time, we could get some rate information too, just to see how we compare. Just to be able to address the public in terms of those kind of questions too. Rates. Do you have any other thoughts, Kevin?
If they provide a good service, I think it's best to reach out to them first before we explore others, and I would guess that there's gonna be a 7 or 8% increase just being in the transportation industry, you know, it's costs.
It's a lot more expensive than it used to be.
Yeah.
Insurance and all that.
Tires are not getting cheaper, oils are not getting cheaper.
All right,
Okay.
and that's the simplest, we can reach out that direction, and then. You know, at the WASB convention, if anyone's going to go, there's lots of different bus vendors that are there. We could explore some of the initial conversations to see, you know, what sort of. You know, what are different packages or pricing available from, if we did have to go. In-house, and, you know, what does that look like from a financial obligation to that?
The advantage of contracting. Outside of the cost piece, which maybe is a disadvantage. Is that you are transferring a risk, and if you look at it from a pure risk management standpoint, that's what you try to do. You lose the control, so that's the negative, but from a risk management, you know, the theories of risk management is avoidance, transfer, or reduce. Whether you're transferring the risk under that scenario. As opposed to getting in the middle of, you know, all the issues that you could have with transportation. But then you balance that out with the cost and the control. So like anything else.
Which, you know, that accident where we didn't have any severe injuries last year, we still have parents that. Are dealing with the insurance company and the vehicle that ran into them where they're not. You know, haven't had their bills paid and so forth. It's a lot of work. Just from that small, simple accident that they had. That I'm sure Durham's spending quite a bit of time trying to work with families.
And I'm sure you are the one fielding phone calls with disenchanted people. So do you have a lot of complaints regarding Durham?
They do Jennifer Wolfgram has done a very good job with managing that. I mean, to consider that we consolidated through bus routes. And I can count the phone calls on one hand, I mean, 5 or less. And when I say 5, I think it's 2 or 3, and we were able to resolve all 3 of them. You know, where the parents had concern, like one was out on ES and with the stop being placed where it was, that concern with it not being a safe stop spot, they ended up sending the driver out. They checked and said, yeah, that's we should go down the cul-de-sac and do pick up there. Yeah, so I mean, they've been very good. I used to have a little bit more phone calls previously, but they do a nice job overall. I mean, for the number of. Call, it would be a lot more if it was.
Coming through the district, yes, for sure.
I used to feel a lot more, yes, when it was on me to resolve this, yes. So that's very nice.
It usually comes down to the local office there, the manager and the receptionist or dispatcher. And if they're doing a nice communication, and it's usually not perfect, but if they're doing a pretty good job, then we don't hear as much.
They try to resolve it first. I should only get called if they're not able to resolve it at that issue. And I should, this committee doesn't convene very often because there is an appeal process that if they don't like my response and we can't come up with an amicable solution, then they can appeal to the transportation. To review that, but we've been able to. We've never had an appeal come up to the transportation committee. We did accommodate one that we probably shouldn't have. It's on that, what road is that, the Preserve Road? It's a private road out by, what's that dog walking park?
Pierce or
Pierce Park, it's out by Pierce, it's
Price Park.
Price Park, yeah, but there's a subdivision that it does like a big, it's a private road, they built it and so it was pretty narrow. And part of our bus contract is we typically don't go down private roads.
Yeah.
And
Sugar Creek Preserve.
Sugar Creek Preserve, thank you. And there was some requests there, because it is quite the walk to get out from that. And they wrote some letters and they requested can we have the bus go down there? So we did accommodate that, but the downside of that is that private road wasn't designed for heavy vehicles. So now as homeowners, they're all gonna have to replace that road sooner when you start rolling. So I heard from a couple other people that, hey, I don't like that buses were going down there because it's gonna wear our road out quicker and make us have to all pay to replace the road. But that's, yeah, for the most part, we can get them all reserved or resolved. So I would say, yes, Durham's done a great job. Jennifer Wolfgren's done a fantastic job going in and managing that and working with the staff. So, I mean, good.
And I see all our day-to-day costs. What is it costing for activities and whatnot?
That's probably the biggest angst that I have. Not that their rates are not fair. It's just, I know when you own your own buses, it was nice because field trips could be cheaper and so forth because you didn't have to charge for that extra bus use. But if we come down, like, they have different shuttle rates, but where's our?
Yeah, that's just our summary sheet, so the rate sheet, I don't think it's probably on that, but I've got it right here. Let's see here.
It's a charge per mile plus per hour.
Yeah, it's an hourly, let's see here. Cost per hour, $31 an hour, and then $2.23 a mile. It's for a field trip. And then then the minimum charge is $127. And then last contract, we did negotiate what we call a shuttle rate between buildings, and I think that's like $62, $62.08 is our shuttle rate. You know, at times you look at it and go, oh my God, it's just so expensive. But then we have special ed transportation that we're doing using seniors on the go and a number. Those are not that much more economical either. It's just expensive.
Yeah. If we have to do a special run, like to the Richardson School, I mean, I would estimate about 30,000 a year. For not even using bus, that's using like a private contractor. It's.
Some of those situations we're able to work out what they call parent contracts. So if the parent's able to do it, we'll do like a mileage or just negotiate, and usually those are our most reasonable cost wise.
Yeah. And that can be a win-win for all parties involved, that they have to be free and available. All right, so we'll reach out to Durham And we'll start that process and see what. I would guess at this point, I think their preference would be to. Make a contract offer rather than go to RFP. And we'll see how that comes back. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts or? Okay, then. That's all we have. On the agenda.
Those vans I see, like at the high school. So, we lease those, we bought those.
We bought those, do they like the youth build van or the ones with our, those were all purchased.
And there's nothing in our contract with Durham that says we,
That prohibits us from.
Correct.
and who gets to drive them? Or who can't drive them?
We do like a background check, so we do a driver record check, so. We've got a couple of like our special ed aides that are doing transport, that's like part of their job. And then, so that's where most of them are used, but like the youth build, when they're going to Whitewater, it's one of the instructors that was driving the vehicle.
And those are more economical than, doing the bus routes.
And I think every one that we purchased, we've been able to purchase through a grant. Which is good and bad, but some of the special ed have to be used for special ed only, so.
Do we have any that we're leasing right now, or they're all owned by us?
I think we might be having at least one for a new student that's gonna go to that Richard School.
Okay.
So that may be a lease through Enterprise.
We have leased, yeah, in the past, which. Well, the Enterprise's rates have gone up quite a bit.
They have,
When we first leased, they had a special state rate, it was just over $500 a month to
Yeah.
lease a vehicle. Unlimited miles for the month, and then you don't have maintenance on that, they're responsible for all, so that made a lot of sense. But I mean, now they're over $1,000 a month, big class insurance.
they are now.
Which makes sense, because I mean, you can't get a car for $500 a month. How they had to rate that low for the type of vehicles they're leasing.
And Durham doesn't have an issue with us using our own vehicles for things like that, which it's not.
For things like that, I mean, if we started to purchase buses and then started transporting kids, I think they would say, wait a minute, but. We talked about like single student or special needs in our contract, that's up to the district.
Mhm.
So it hasn't been an issue with the bus company, but honestly, they probably appreciate that because they didn't have enough drivers to accommodate it anyway.
Yeah,
Well, that we have to supply, like, I know a lot of special ed, we have to supply an aid to a bus aid or something as well too.
it depends on the student and their needs. Yeah, but that can be in some cases. But I know there's still times of the year where they don't have enough buses or drivers it gets to be a challenge to accommodate, like in the spring. You have a lot of the school programs, they want to go and do field trips, but then they're limited because they have to be back in time for the co-curricular bus runs. And so spring gets really
And that's
challenging,
That's still the rule, right?
yeah.
That they have to be back for the bus runs.
Yeah, for the, that's my understanding, because they'll have to budget their field trips in order to get back in time. They'll try to accommodate, there's certain type field trips. Like if they're going to a Brewer game or something, okay, we've got 3 buses and they're going to be back. I think they've even reached out to other terminals in the past in Durham and brought in other drivers, but.
On certain days of the week, like maybe a Wednesday, they can accommodate easier because there may not be events, scheduled on a Wednesday as opposed to Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
Well, I used to go to Ford, it wasn't Kunis at that time, but Ford and Delavan. And rent a van to take kids to contest. And I think I paid $50. And I drove myself, and then I think Jones axed that and said you could no longer do field trips or any kind without going through Jones. So that's why I was asking.
That's
Yeah.
a-
If
that's
they're-
a good question. We haven't had that on the other most special ones, no. I think that's it. We just need a motion to adjourn then.
I make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Thank you.